You don't get to treat people like that and walk away. The words hit the marble floor before I even realized I'd whispered them under my breath. I froze mid-step, the silver tray in my hands trembling as the champagne glasses clinked against each other, echoing like tiny alarms across the grand hall. The gala lights reflected off the crystal, creating a million fractured stars at my feet, and I could feel every eye in the room turning toward me, though most didn't even know why. I took a deep breath, forcing my green eyes to stay forward as I knelt to gather the scattered glass, my hands shaking, my knuckles white around the edges of the tray. Behind me, laughter cut through the air like ice, sharp and deliberate. The man at the center of it all, his slick hair reflecting the chandelier's glow, had just mocked my spilled tray with that perfect blend of disdain and amusement that made my stomach drop. I clenched my jaw, wishing I could disappear, my heart hammering at a tempo that felt deafening in my own ears. That's when I noticed him, standing across the room, just inside the shadowed corner near the entrance, tall, broad-shouldered, his black suit cut perfectly against the golden light, every movement calculated, controlled. His eyes, steel blue, cold yet piercing, locked onto mine, and I could feel the air between us thicken, a tangible pull, though I didn't understand why. Dominic Russo. I had heard the name whispered once or twice, the kind that sends shivers down your spine, the kind of reputation you can feel in a room even before seeing him. And now he was watching me, calm, silent, but undeniably present, like a predator who had already assessed the field. I straightened, forcing my hands to steady the tray, my mind racing with the rehearsed movements of the night. But the warmth of embarrassment, the sting of humiliation, didn't fade. The arrogant heir hadn't noticed him yet, still smirking, still confident that his wealth made him untouchable. Dominic's gaze never wavered. Every subtle gesture, the shift of his weight, the way his hand lightly brushed the side of his coat, radiated authority without a word. And then he moved, not abruptly, but with a precision that made everyone take a subtle step back, creating a space between himself and the rest of the room. A buffer that seemed to whisper control. The heir's smirk faltered, just slightly, and I noticed the change before anyone else did. The subtle stiffening of posture, the way his hand hovered for a moment over the table as if unsure. My chest tightened, not from fear, but from the weight of being seen, truly seen, in a way that made me hold my breath. I had spent the night blending into the crowd, doing my job, staying invisible, and now every muscle in me screamed awareness, every sense heightened. Dominic's eyes swept the room, noting the air, noting me, noting the small chaos of scattered glass and murmured apologies. Then, with a measured step, he crossed the floor, his shoes clicking softly against the marble, echoing like a metronome that synchronized with my racing heartbeat. The room seemed to hold its breath, a collective pause, the tension coiling in the air around us. He stopped 3 feet from me, close enough that I could see the faint crease at the corner of his jaw, the calculated calm of his expression. He extended one hand, not to touch me, not to intrude, but to subtly adjust a piece of my hair that had escaped during the commotion, a gesture precise, commanding, protective. I swallowed hard, feeling the invisible barrier of his presence, the unspoken assertion that he would not let this injustice pass. The arrogant heir looked up, finally noticing Dominic for the first time, and I saw the flicker of recognition, a slight twinge of uncertainty crossing his face. Dominic's voice was low, controlled, carrying across the silent gap. That behavior will not go uncorrected. Simple words, but the room felt them like a gust of wind sweeping through the crowd, rearranging the energy, reminding everyone where the real power lay. I exhaled slowly, my fingers gripping the tray tighter, feeling a spark of something unexpected, relief, awe, a sense that someone was finally seeing, finally protecting, finally taking a stand. And in that moment, amidst the chandeliers, the murmurs, the scattered glasses, I understood a truth I hadn't allowed myself to admit. I wasn't invisible, not anymore, and someone who mattered had taken notice. The hum of the string quartet continued in the background, low and elegant, filling the hall with a soft rhythm that felt almost protective. I adjusted the tray in my hands, trying to steady my trembling, but my eyes could not leave Dominic Russo as he moved effortlessly through the crowd, his presence commanding attention without a word. Every detail of his movement was precise. The way his shoes whispered against the marble floor, the subtle shift of his shoulders, the measured glance he cast toward the arrogant Heir. I could feel the energy of the room bend around him, people instinctively stepping aside, conversations halting as if the Heir itself was acknowledging his authority. Dominic stopped for a moment, scanning the perimeter, his gaze returning to me, and I caught a fleeting sense of reassurance amidst the chaos that my mind could not yet articulate. The Heir, now aware of the scrutiny upon him, shifted uneasily, his confidence faltering in a subtle but undeniable way. Dominic did not rush, did not need to. The space he carved with his presence alone communicated control, judgment, and quiet expectation. I set the tray down carefully on a nearby table, the crystal glinting in the warm light, and allowed myself to breathe, though the rapid beat of my heart reminded me of the tension I had not yet fully released. Dominic approached, stopping just close enough to exude strength but maintaining a respectful distance, and his voice, low and deliberate, cut through the murmurs around us. Do not allow disrespect to pass unchecked. It was not a command to me, yet it carried the weight of protective intention, a shield without physical touch. I nodded slightly, the words grounding me, and in that moment, I realized the magnitude of his awareness, how he had assessed the room, the Heir, and me in a single, fluid movement, and what he perceived as necessary to correct the imbalance of respect and power. The Heir glanced again, now fully conscious of Dominic's watchful eyes, and I saw the uncertainty ripple across his face, a subtle acknowledgement that his actions had consequences far beyond the fleeting attention of the gala. Dominic's presence shifted the dynamic of the room entirely, creating a zone of calm within the formal chaos, a controlled sphere where I could feel a sense of safety and clarity for the first time that evening. I straightened, inhaling slowly, my shoulders relaxing just enough to notice that my hands no longer shook as violently. Dominic's gaze held mine for a moment longer, and in that silence, an understanding passed, unspoken, yet unequivocal, that he was here to maintain balance, to observe, and to ensure respect was restored. The string notes lingered in the air, the subtle aroma of polished wood and faint perfume mingling with the warmth of chandeliers, and for the first time since the incident, I felt the tight knot in my chest begin to loosen, the weight of humiliation giving way to a quiet, steady awareness that I was no longer alone, and that someone who commanded the attention of an entire room had taken it upon himself to ensure that dignity, even for someone like me, was acknowledged. The chatter of the gala faded into the background as I followed Dominic's calm stride through the crowd, each step measured and purposeful. The lights glinted off the polished marble, and the faint scent of aged wood and perfumed air filled the space between us. I could feel every eye turn as he moved, not in a threatening way, but in a manner that demanded attention without force. The arrogant Heir lingered near the buffet, glancing over his shoulder, uncertainty creeping into his posture, while Dominic's gaze remained unwavering, a silent assertion that the evening's order had shifted. I adjusted the tray in my hands, trying to appear composed, though my pulse raced, the rhythm echoing in my ears. Dominic stopped just outside the circle of chandeliers, his silhouette cutting a striking figure against the golden glow, and he raised a hand slightly, a subtle gesture that commanded pause, attention, and reflection without a single word spoken. The Heir stiffened visibly, and I could see the tension ripple through him, an almost imperceptible acknowledgement that his previous confidence was no longer sufficient. Dominic's steel blue eyes swept the room once more before resting back on me, and I felt a strange combination of relief and anticipation, as though the weight of the room had been momentarily lifted by his presence. I inhaled slowly, letting the subtle warmth of his protective aura wash over me, grounding my nerves as I gathered the last few pieces of crystal from the floor, careful not to draw attention, yet acutely aware of the invisible connection we now shared. The soft strains of the quartet provided a steady, almost hypnotic rhythm, their notes punctuating the quiet authority that Dominic radiated, making the room feel both expansive and intimate at once. I straightened, meeting his gaze for the briefest moment, and felt an unspoken reassurance pass between us, a recognition of my presence and worth in a way that no one else had offered all evening. The air shifted, hesitating, the air around him charged with the realization that his actions had consequences, that the presence of someone with genuine authority could alter the entire energy of the room. Dominic's expression remained calm, composed, yet every line of his posture conveyed control, protection, and meticulous awareness. I felt a sudden clarity, a sense that the scattered glass, the murmurs, and the scrutinizing eyes were no longer the center of my focus. Instead, the knowledge that I was under Dominic's watchful care provided a steady anchor amidst the sensory chaos. As he finally inclined his head slightly toward me, a small but deliberate acknowledgement, I felt my chest ease, my hands stop trembling, and the heat of embarrassment start to fade into a quiet strength. The room continued to move around us, the murmurs resuming. Yet within the invisible perimeter Dominic had established, there was a palpable sense of order, respect, and subtle tension that promised both safety and recognition. I exhaled fully, the weight of the evening beginning to shift, realizing that the subtle interplay of presence, attention, and authority had redefined everything that had seemed overwhelming moments ago, and I could not help but feel that something significant had changed in the dynamic of the room. One small moment of awareness bridging the distance between vulnerability and respect. The soft clinking of glasses and the distant hum of conversation became background noise as I moved carefully, following Dominic through the gala, without drawing attention to myself. The air was warm, filled with the scent of polished wood, perfume, and the faint aroma of hors d'oeuvres. Yet every nerve in my body was alert, attuned to the subtle currents of authority that seemed to flow from him. Dominic's steps were precise, deliberate, each one measured, commanding the unspoken respect of everyone he passed. I adjusted the tray in my hands, feeling the weight as a reminder of my own presence, grounding me as I navigated the crowd. Across the room, the air remained frozen, the realization of his misstep etched subtly into his posture. Dominic's eyes flicked toward him once, a silent assessment, and I could see the shift in energy, the air's confidence faltering without a word being exchanged. I inhaled slowly, letting the rhythm of the quartet settle my racing heart, the strings weaving a steady, calming pattern beneath the tension of the room. Dominic stopped near the corner where the light caught the edge of a grand piano, the glow illuminating the sharp lines of his face, his black suit perfectly tailored, his posture effortlessly composed. He turned toward me, his gaze lingering just long enough to impart a sense of reassurance and unspoken understanding, and I felt the invisible weight of his attention, both protective and commanding, settle around me like a shield. I straightened my shoulders, taking a small, measured step forward, the tray steady now in my hands, and for the first time that evening, I sensed a calm that contrasted sharply with the earlier chaos. The air shifted again, subtle but noticeable, his movements tentative, a silent acknowledgement that the balance of the room had changed. Dominic's presence alone had altered the dynamics, creating a quiet authority that spread outward, a ripple of respect and consideration that affected everyone within its reach. I allowed my eyes to meet his, feeling an unspoken connection, a reassurance that amidst the swirling energy of the gala, I was not invisible, and someone powerful was aware of my presence, willing to ensure dignity and respect remained intact. The room continued its rhythm, guests moving, conversations resuming, but within the sphere Dominic had created, there was a palpable sense of order, a subtle tension that reminded everyone of the invisible hand guiding the evening. I exhaled, a small, steady breath, feeling the lingering heat of embarrassment ease as confidence began to take root. Every detail of the room, the glittering chandeliers, the polished floors, the subtle shifts in lighting, became secondary to the quiet, commanding presence that had shifted the night, anchoring me in a moment of clarity, assurance, and unexpected calm. I could feel the thread of attention, Dominic's awareness, weaving through the room, touching the air, touching me, and setting a tone that was unspoken yet undeniable, and I understood in that moment that the course of the evening had changed, and my own sense of presence and security had been redefined by someone who saw, truly saw, and chose to act with precision and care. The ambient hum of conversation and soft laughter created a gentle backdrop as I navigated the remaining tables, each step carefully measured, my green eyes flicking toward Dominic Russo as he observed the gala with an almost imperceptible intensity. The chandeliers above threw golden patterns across the polished floor, and the faint scent of white roses mingled with the aroma of hors d'oeuvres, anchoring the sensory chaos of the room. I adjusted my posture, the tray steady now in my hands, aware that every movement was under subtle scrutiny, and a strange sense of calm settled over me, a feeling I had not anticipated earlier in the evening. Dominic's presence was a quiet but undeniable anchor, his dark suit perfectly fitted, his posture both commanding and precise, radiating a measured authority that seemed to bend the energy of the room around him. Across the hall, the Heir lingered near the buffet, hesitating, his confident demeanor softening as he registered the silent command of Dominic's attention. I inhaled, feeling the pulse of the string quartet beneath the hushed murmurs, each note weaving a rhythm that contrasted with the tension that had dominated moments before. Dominic's gaze returned to me briefly, calm and reassuring, and I felt the invisible tether of awareness tighten, a subtle but grounding presence that reminded me that someone with power was watching, guiding, and protecting without intrusion. The Heir shifted again, a small step backward, a subtle acknowledgement of the authority he now recognized, his earlier arrogance tempered by the silent intervention that had reframed the space. I allowed my shoulders to relax slightly, the tight knot of unease in my chest loosening as the awareness of being seen, truly seen, settled in, and I realized that the weight of embarrassment had begun to lift, replaced by a tentative sense of confidence. The room continued its measured rhythm, guests moving through the light-dappled space, conversations resuming, but within the sphere of Dominic's presence, a quiet order prevailed, an unspoken understanding that the dynamics of respect had shifted. I stepped carefully, noticing the subtle reactions of those around us, how attention had redirected in imperceptible ways, the Heir charged not with tension, but with recognition of the power quietly asserted. Dominic adjusted his stance slightly, a minimal movement that conveyed consideration, control, and readiness, and I felt the reassurance of his presence deepen, the silent communication between us grounding me in the midst of the gala's sensory swirl. I exhaled slowly, the pulse of the night settling into a rhythm that matched the string quartet, a steady cadence that allowed me to navigate the remaining moments with a sense of poise I had not possessed before. The Heir lingered in uncertainty, glances cast toward Dominic revealing the subtle influence of authority, while my awareness of the invisible tether of guidance, protection, and acknowledgement strengthened, reinforcing a sense of order and dignity that permeated the space, quietly but undeniably. I moved through the hall with deliberate care, feeling the weight of observation and protection envelop me, a sensation both calming and empowering, and I understood in that moment that the trajectory of the evening had shifted, the subtle interplay of authority, attention, and presence transforming the energy of the room and the way I perceived my place within it. The golden glow from the chandeliers cast a warm, almost ethereal light across the room as I carefully stepped between the tables, the faint scent of polished marble and floral arrangements mingling with the soft notes of the quartet. Dominic Russo's presence behind me felt like an invisible tether, steadying my steps and guiding my attention without a word. I could feel the quiet shift in the air as the guests moved, conversations dipping and rising in a delicate rhythm, everyone subconsciously attuned to the silent authority that radiated from him. Across the room, the Heir hesitated, his earlier bravado replaced with a careful wariness, the subtle tension in his posture telling me more than words ever could. I adjusted the tray in my hands, the weight grounding me, my pulse syncing with the gentle cadence of Dominic's measured steps. His eyes flicked toward the Heir briefly, a single glance that conveyed assessment, command, and an unspoken demand for decorum, and I noticed the way the man's confident stance softened, a quiet acknowledgement that he had overstepped. The warmth of Dominic's attention returned to me, and I felt a grounding calm, an assurance that amidst the subtle chaos of the gala, someone was aware, watching, and subtly ensuring my dignity was preserved. I inhaled slowly, allowing the rhythm of the strings to blend with the controlled energy that Dominic exuded, and I realized that I could finally move with intention, my presence in the room acknowledged and safeguarded. The Heir glanced again, tentative and cautious, as if measuring each breath, each movement, against the silent command Dominic carried with him. I could feel the room's energy realign around Dominic's authority, a delicate balance of attention and restraint, where respect was silently asserted without confrontation. I set the tray down on a side table with careful precision, noting the glint of crystal and the polished surface. The mundane act transformed into a moment of poise under his observant eyes. Dominic shifted slightly, a subtle movement of shoulders and head that conveyed vigilance and consideration, and I felt the sense of being protected deepen, a quiet power that influenced not just the air but the broader atmosphere, compelling attention and deference. I exhaled fully, letting my shoulders relax as the initial tension began to melt away, replaced by an acute awareness of the subtle dynamics at play, the ebb and flow of respect and observation weaving around us. The strings of the quartet filled the background with a steady cadence, each note mirroring the measured pace that Dominic set, the gentle pull of authority guiding the room's rhythm. I walked with deliberate care, my green eyes catching his for a brief moment, a silent connection passing between us, unspoken yet undeniable, reassuring me that my presence was acknowledged, that my dignity remained intact, and that the invisible web of control, protection, and respect he wove around me had subtly but irrevocably shifted the energy of the gala. The gala continued around us, the hum of polite conversation and soft clatter of glasses forming a rhythmic backdrop as I moved through the room with Dominic Russo just a step behind, his presence a quiet anchor. The golden glow of the chandeliers reflected off the polished floors, creating streaks of light that danced around the room, catching the edges of crystal glasses and silver trays, adding a subtle shimmer to the otherwise calm scene. Dominic's eyes never left the Heir, whose previous arrogance now gave way to hesitation, the faint crease between his brows revealing the weight of awareness that had settled over him. I felt the rhythm of the space shift. Each step I took met with an unspoken acknowledgement of Dominic's authority, a current of respect flowing through the room without a word spoken. My hands steadied around the tray, the previous tremor replaced by a cautious confidence, a small but tangible effect of the protective energy surrounding us. The Heir's movements grew tentative, a subtle but unmistakable sign that his previous sense of control had been tempered by the silent influence of Dominic's watchful presence. I inhaled deeply, allowing the scent of polished wood, faint floral arrangements, and the underlying aroma of soft leather from Dominic's suit to fill my senses, grounding me in the moment. Every glance, every movement of Dominic's shoulders and hands communicated precision, assessment, and restraint, a language understood without sound, and I felt the weight of that quiet communication settle over me with reassurance. The guests moved around us, their interactions resuming as if the room had collectively acknowledged a shift in energy, yet within the invisible radius of Dominic's influence, there was a discernible order, an unspoken balance between decorum, respect, and subtle power. I continued forward, glancing at Dominic, catching the briefest acknowledgement in his eyes, a quiet affirmation that the evening's events had been carefully observed and managed. The Heir lingered near the edge of the gathering, glancing furtively toward Dominic, the small hesitation in his posture betraying his understanding that the dynamics had changed, that the subtle but undeniable authority present now defined the room. I allowed a small, measured smile to form, the tension in my shoulders loosening as the evening's energy aligned with the silent but firm presence behind me. Dominic's hand adjusted slightly, a simple movement conveying readiness, care, and vigilance, and I felt the effect ripple through the room, a subtle realignment of attention and respect that could be felt even in the quiet corners. The music played on, steady and deliberate, matching the calm, assured cadence that Dominic set, and I realized that the gala, once overwhelming in its grandeur and energy, now carried a rhythm in which I could move with awareness, composure, and a growing sense of quiet confidence. Every reflection in the polished floor, every flicker of light off crystal, and every cautious glance from the Heir reinforced the sense of order and dignity Dominic had established, an invisible web of control, and care that allowed me to navigate the space with poise and subtle assurance. Understanding that in this room, respect had been quietly, but unmistakably, restored. The night air shifted slightly as the gala began its quiet descent toward the later hours, the golden chandeliers casting elongated shadows that traced the polished marble floors like delicate fingers of light. I moved with cautious confidence, the weight of the tray balanced in my hands. Yet more than the physical weight, I felt the presence of Dominic Russo as an invisible anchor, steadying my steps, guiding my awareness, and silently reminding me that I was not alone in the ebb and flow of attention surrounding us. Guests whispered behind elegantly held champagne flutes, their conversations dipping and rising. But within the space that Dominic seemed to create around himself and me, there was a sense of clarity, a controlled rhythm that allowed me to navigate without hesitation. I glanced at Dominic, noting the subtle shifts in his posture, the way his shoulders squared, the slight tilt of his head, the way his eyes assessed the room, the air, and even me with meticulous precision. Each movement communicated observation, patience, and unspoken protection, a language of presence I understood more intuitively with every passing second. The Heir, once confident and domineering, now moved with careful calculation, aware that his every gesture was noted, measured, and silently evaluated, the previous arrogance tempered by Dominic's quiet authority. I exhaled slowly, letting the faint fragrance of white roses and polished wood mingle with the warmth of the room, allowing a sense of calm to permeate my senses, anchoring me in a moment of poise I had not felt before. Dominic's gaze returned to me for a brief moment, lingering just enough to convey reassurance and acknowledgement, the invisible tether of his presence grounding my movements and lending a quiet strength to the way I carried myself. The quartet's notes, soft and deliberate, underscored the subtle tension and resolution in the room, creating a harmony between the sensory environment and the unspoken order Dominic had established. I allowed my eyes to sweep briefly over the guests, noting the subtle, deferential gestures, the faint hesitation in their steps as the presence of authority gently reminded them of the evening's recalibrated balance. My heart, once racing from the earlier moments of tension, now beat in a steady rhythm, a reflection of the calm control Dominic had silently imparted to the space around us. I adjusted the tray slightly, feeling the smooth glass beneath my fingertips, and noticed how even the light reflected differently, sharper and yet somehow softer under the careful attention he gave to the room's energy. The Heir lingered near the edges of the gathering, glancing frequently, hesitation marking each movement, a subtle acknowledgement that the dynamics of power, respect, and observation had shifted irrevocably. I walked with careful, deliberate steps, my green eyes meeting Dominic's for the briefest instant, a silent communication passing between us, confirming the reassurance, the control, and the unspoken protection he provided. The gala continued around us, but within the invisible radius he established, order, respect, and attention to presence reigned, and I felt a quiet but undeniable sense that the evening, and my place within it, had been transformed, the subtle interplay of observation, authority, and reassurance creating a foundation of dignity, awareness, and trust that resonated through every polished surface, every flicker of light, and every careful step I took across the marble floor. The gala had begun to wind down, the golden chandeliers casting long, soft reflections across the polished marble as guests moved toward the exits in hushed conversations and careful steps. I felt the calm of Dominic Russo's presence behind me, steady and precise, an invisible reassurance that guided my own movements through the room. Every footstep I took was measured, deliberate, yet the lingering warmth of authority and protection from Dominic allowed me to navigate with confidence I had not possessed earlier. The Heir lingered near the buffet, glancing occasionally in Dominic's direction, his posture tentative, an acknowledgement that the earlier energy had shifted and that subtle power now dictated the room's flow. I adjusted the tray in my hands one last time, the glass smooth and cold beneath my fingers, a grounding anchor as I moved toward the exit path, aware of the quiet attention that still followed us. Dominic's gaze flicked toward me, a brief yet meaningful connection, his eyes conveying recognition, reassurance, and an unspoken affirmation that my presence mattered, that dignity had been restored, and that respect, once in question, was now unmistakably asserted. The soft strains of the quartet continued, their notes weaving a gentle rhythm through the ambient chatter, creating a soothing cadence that mirrored the careful order Dominic had established across the room. I noticed the subtle reactions of the remaining guests, small gestures of deference, careful adjustments of posture and gaze, a silent acknowledgement of the shift in dynamics, each micro-movement reinforcing the quiet authority that shaped the evening. Dominic's movements were deliberate, each step a balance of observation, control, and consideration, signaling both presence and protection without ever intruding, and I felt the invisible web of influence solidify, a comforting anchor. Amid the fading excitement of the gala, the Heir, now fully conscious of the boundaries set, retreated with careful steps, glances toward Dominic betraying a mix of respect and recalibrated awareness, a subtle but palpable lesson absorbed without confrontation. I exhaled, allowing the tension that had accompanied me throughout the night to ease, feeling my shoulders relax, the pulse of anxiety replaced with a steady rhythm, the result of the protective, silent attention Dominic offered. Each reflection off the polished floors, the faint shimmer of chandeliers in the crystal glasses, and the delicate warmth of the ambient lighting now seemed to hold a new clarity, a quiet order that had not been present before. I moved toward the exit, Dominic's presence a steadying force at my back, a subtle but undeniable promise of vigilance and reassurance that extended beyond the physical space. The gala faded around us, yet the invisible perimeter of control and respect persisted, a final, quiet testament to the shift in power, attention, and dignity that had defined the evening. I took the last measured steps toward the door, feeling the weight of the night settle into a sense of clarity and quiet confidence, knowing that the evening's events had changed not only the energy of the room, but the way I perceived my own presence, acknowledged, protected, and quietly empowered within the refined glow of the gala.